Welcome to our video training today on ministry compensation components. I'm Marshall Shannon with Ministry Design Training. Several housekeeping items I'd like to cover before we get started with the training today. First is that if you'll pause this video and scroll down your screen, you're going to find two items there that are meant to help you. The first is a resource section that has in it the resources that will help you deepen and enrich your study as you consider how to put together the compensation packages for your church staff. Secondly, you'll find a comment section which is meant to be an interactive tool between our training staff and you in your church. And so you can stop at any moment, pause the video, scroll down, ask that question, or make that comment while it's in your head. Then scroll back up and finish watching the video. Do not punch or click submit for the comment section until you're finished watching the video, because the software is designed to start your video back over again, and I'm sorry, but I can't do anything about that at this time. So there's two housekeeping things there for you. The third one is to make certain you understand, as a ministry design coach, I am not intending this as legal advice as though it were from a tax attorney or from a CPA. I am neither. I am been both a senior pastor and a ministry coach, and that's where I've spent my 35 years of experience in serving the Lord. So as I do this is coming out of my years as a senior pastor, growing a church from small to large, and from no staff to multiple staff, both full and part-time, and then my experience over the last decade in coaching pastors, and it's what I've done full-time. So as we go through this, just understand you're going to need to verify and dig into it. Here's the fourth thing. I cannot control two things when it comes to the compensation packages. Number one, I can't control the law. Congress can change the law. Your local state can change your local state laws and even your local city laws about your tax code. Secondly, there isn't just one interpretation of the tax code, both federally and state. There's multiple interpretations, and I have found that it changes from district to district and region to region. And so some of the things that I say that I have been taught and understand in my years of experience, someone else across the country in another region may be saying something completely different. And so interpretations differ. That's why we have so many denominations, and at least in part. And so as you look at this, pull in the information and do your due diligence to deepen your study. Interact with us, use the resources we're offering to you, find others if you wish, but to steward this portion, this part of your ministry is honoring to the Lord. All right, let me go through some things here as we're going to look at the four basic components of a compensation package. I want you to know that Leadership Magazine did a survey about pastors' work, home, and lifestyles. And in the website, hissheep.org, and it's in the source at the end of this and on the website, so don't worry about writing it down. Here's what they wrote, an article about the research done by Leadership Magazine. 22% of pastors who were surveyed were seeking extra income, supplemental income, to make ends meet, and 28% of the pastors surveyed felt that their existing compensation was inadequate. 69% of pastors' spouses work outside the home, and here's the key phrase, to make ends meet. Not to thrive, but to survive is what I get from that comment. The top problem in clergy marriages are insufficient time, use of money, income level, communication difficulty, and congregational expectations. In the middle of those five things was use of money and income level. Your pastor's family is just like our own family. We have money problems. They have money problems. They struggle with time management. We struggle with time management. We struggle with how to use the money and how to make more disposable income, how to save for a rainy day, how to save for retirement. We all struggle with these things. And so the biblical thing to do is to put together a compensation package that will meet the needs of the individual staff members on your church family, in your church family. So as we go through this, understand there's a great need for what I'm saying. Matter of fact, this video series came out of our laser lesson that when we put that out, we got such tremendous feedback and response to it that we felt like we needed to go ahead and put this together and give it to you. So let's start right now with the ministry compensation components and go through the different things that are here. There are 4 that we're going to cover: your salary, the benefits, the business expense, and some other considerations that you might not have really ever thought much about or even known that they could be considered. And so we think this is going to be a helpful thing. So whether you're a senior pastor trying to package your staff's pay, or you're a finance committee member, a budget committee member, a church leader, you need to stop and look at this and understand the importance of this and understand the benefits of this to the church family and to your staff, to give thought to it. Well, let's look first of all at salary. When I talk about salary, I'm talking about your cash, your paycheck. This is the money that you receive, and generally speaking, it is taxable for federal and state taxes if you have state tax. But it's taxable. So a minister's cash salary can be subject to federal, state, and local income taxes. There are some exceptions to that I'll get to in a moment. Increasing the cash portion of the compensation package will probably obligate the pastor to pay more in taxes. So if you go to say, well, we want to give our pastor a 10% raise, let's just increase his salary. I'm asking you to listen to this entire presentation, to mull it over, to do some research, then to discuss it as a group and figure out how to give him the best benefit without taking money out of the pocket of your pastor because you put it all in cash. Now, in dealing with salary, you've got the cash that you're dealing with. Then you've got housing that you're dealing with. He is going to own his own home or rent their own home, or could be a condominium, a townhouse, an apartment, a single-family dwelling, a duplex, or a mobile home. Somehow or another, he's going to have housing expense because he and his family are going to live in that house. Now, when you look at this, they also, many pastors are still living in a church parsonage. So owning, renting, or church-provided housing. In the Internal Revenue Code, and I believe it's Section 107, allows ordained ministers to exclude from their federally taxed income some or all of the cost of providing their primary or their principal residence, the home where they live all the time. They say that because some pastors may have enough wealth or circumstances where they own 2 or 3 homes, but they live primarily in one. So it's your principal residence is how the code, I think, states it. So remember, this exclusion applies only to a pastor's federal income tax. Designating a larger portion of salary as a housing allowance will reduce a minister's federal tax liability, but overestimating the housing allowance, in other words, how much you give to it, may cause the pastor to underreport his taxable wages, which could lead to an underpayment of taxes. So he gets ready to do his taxes in February, March, April, and gets to the end of it and realizes, they overestimated, and I didn't pay self-employment taxes or an estimated taxes quarterly. I didn't pay enough, and now I owe a whole lot more than I thought I was going to owe. So if you overestimate how much they're going to spend on housing, you can hurt them with their taxes. And if you underestimate it, you can have a problem there because he pays taxes on housing expenses that you didn't allot within the housing allowance. So calculate carefully and include your staff in the discussion. In other words, don't design their pay package without discussing with them to be sure you don't hurt them. So this is going to mean you're going to have to talk to your individual staff, if you have 1 or 5, and you have pastors who are getting part of their pay package as an allowance for housing, that they've got to estimate what they're going to spend on housing. And so here's what housing may include. It may include their mortgage payment or their rent payment or a fair amount estimated for the parsonage rental. So it also can include the home insurance. If they have homeowners insurance or renters insurance to protect their belongings and their liability, that's a part of housing. Property taxes. If they own their own home, they're going to have probably property taxes. If your state doesn't do it that way, then it's not something you need to be concerned about. Maintenance and improvements. If your pastor's living in his house and he's going to add a prophet's chamber because he ends up serving as the host for out of state or out of the country missionaries who come to be with your church, or he is housing interns there or other preachers who are coming in as guest speakers, whatever the situation, and he's going to add 400 square feet to his house to put in a prophet's chamber, and he's paying for it, you might want to look at increasing that year's housing to cover that, so his expenses, just to try and give you some grasp on it. Or he's putting in new windows, or he's having to replace an HVAC system, and he sees that coming, or the roofing is going to have to be replaced in his home. His housing allowance will reduce his taxable income federally if you'll foresee this, and also I believe you're allowed to adjust this as the year goes on. So it also includes utilities. So basically, let me summarize it this way. Basically, it includes any cost associated with maintaining a home. Now, there are some housing regulations that come about, okay? For federal income tax purposes, the excludable amount of a housing allowance is limited to certain things. So let me just summarize it as I understand it. If you set a certain amount for housing allowance, let's say it's $1 for the year. Let's use this illustration. His housing allowance is $1 for the year, and he only spends 75%. So by the receipts that he has collected and put into the different categories, his housing allowance is $1, but he only spends 75 cents. He's got to report the 25 cents above that, which he has receipts to give evidence of that he spent, and he has to pay federal taxes on that. Now, here's the other scenario. You set the housing allowance at $1, and he goes and spends $1.25. Now he's lost 25 cents of deductible income that's now going to be taxable. So he's going to have to pay federal taxes on that 25%. Now, there are regulations that let you adjust this through the year, and you'll have to check and keep up with that law because they could change it. And so a minister cannot exclude more than their church designates. So the designated amount must at least be enough to cover what he is going to spend that year on housing. If the designated amount exceeds what you have allowed, the pastor must report the excess as taxable income. Now, the church can, or they must, designate the housing allowance portion of the pastor's salary in advance of when that salary takes effect. So what that statement means is that his expenditure is coming in October, he realizes it in August, and you designate and increase his housing allowance out of his cash salary, he's okay because he hasn't received the pay for October. If I'm understanding and interpreting what is being said, that's what it means, and that's how we did it the years that I was a senior pastor. If your pastor, and this is an important housing thing to catch, is living in a church parsonage, how do you determine the rental value? You can, if he is paying the utilities for the parsonage, then you've got to take part of his cash salary and designate that as housing to cover that so he can deduct that and not be taxed on that housing. If you as a church are paying the utilities on the parsonage, then that's a separate line item in the budget. But as you go through and do this, you want to make certain that you have estimated the fair rental value of the parsonage. You can do a market analysis through a real estate agent. You can do an appraisal through an official appraisal, I guess, to get the value of the house. Some have said take the appraisal or the market value of the house and take 1% of that, and that's the monthly rent. That's a fair rental value of the house monthly. So a $100,000 home, that is a fair market value of the house done by a real estate agent is how I've always done it, and is $100,000. 1% of that would be $1,000. That would be the fair amount for the church to allot as part of the housing allowance for it. Now, that's one way of doing that. So your church can determine the fair rental value of the parsonage. You can designate a part of the pastor's cash salary as a parsonage allowance so that anything he is doing to maintain the home in the parsonage, such as furniture or renter's insurance or some other work that he is doing, mechanical, electrical, plumbing in the house, structural, cosmetic, that he can deduct that as it's not taxable with federal income tax. And so when you do that, the allowance is excluded from the pastor's taxable income to the extent that it can be justified by actual housing cost. Now, let me talk to you about the next item. And this you may not have thought of, but I just put here on the screen Social Security. But I want to talk to you about and giving the pastor, those who are ordained ministers, an offset for their self-employment tax. While pastors are employees of the church for federal income tax reporting purposes, they are self-employed for Social Security purposes with respect to services they perform in the exercise of their ministry in the church. This dual status, being both employees and self-employed, means they are not subject to withholding requirements for the employee's share of Social Security and Medicare taxes. So here's what's happening. If you took advantage of your opportunity under the tax code to opt out of Social Security, you don't have to worry about paying self-employment tax. If you are in Social Security, you've got to worry about quarterly payments for your self-employment tax. You've got the Self-Employment Contributions Act tax. It's what the technical name is, I believe. So let's say that it's the first quarter, and you look at your salary, and you've got to pay an estimated tax on that and your housing allowance for self-employment tax. And so you have to pay the full 15.3%, I believe it is. You've got to pay that full amount now as a self-employed person. If you were considered an employee, the church would be paying half of the 15.3, and you'd be paying half of the 15.3, and they would be turning the money in for you, deducting it out of your pay. They would be reserving their portion and turning that in quarterly to the federal government. Well, if you don't have that, here your pastor is stuck with paying all of that because of the tax laws. So here's what I would ask you to consider. Consider providing a Social Security Medicare tax offset of at least 50% of the SECA tax, of the Social Security Contributions Act tax. So pay half of the 15.3. What's that, 7.65? And so as you consider this, you go through, and this provides an equivalent of probably those of you that are in finance committee or budget committee or the lay leadership of the church, and you're listening to this, this pays the church's half of that. So it is you can lift a burden off your pastoral staff who are in Social Security by understanding that they are paying an extra portion here that normally they wouldn't have to. All right, so let's go to the next item. For those who are living in a church parsonage, I want you to consider that they don't gather in any equity because the church parsonage belongs to the church, not to the pastor. To compensate them for living in your parsonage, instead of paying them sufficient money so they can buy their own home, consider taking a portion of money and putting it in a fund so that they can build up equity equal to what they would have gained had they owned their own home. So consider giving your pastor an equity allowance if he lives in your church housing instead of purchasing their own home. This gives the pastor the estimated equity buildup if he lived in his own home instead of the church's. Now, here's a caution to you, and thanks to mmbb.org, which deals with retirement compensation and retirement planning for pastors. But they said, here's a caution. If your pastor's retirement calculations are based on his salary, meaning his cash take-home, he may underestimate his retirement contributions because his housing allowance isn't included in the math. So you need to look and estimate and guesstimate down the road, what is his real expenses going to be when he turns retirement age and no longer pastors your church and is receiving his full compensation? How much does he need to contribute regularly, meaning on his pay period, to put into his retirement so that he can keep the same lifestyle when he retires? And so if you don't include the housing in the math, you're going to have problems because he's going to think, well, I'm only making $1 a year and his housing is another $1, and he only plans to have $1 a year or 70-80% of that amount for his retirement, when really he's not thought about how is he going to pay for his housing in the future. So take this entire compensation into account when helping your pastoral staff figure their retirement needs so that they contribute sufficient money to cover all the expenses during retirement. So salary is one of the 4 components of compensation packages, and you've got 4 areas to consider: cash, housing, Social Security offset, and an equity allowance. The second portion of this that we want to talk about in this video training is benefits. Now, there are usually 4 categories of benefits offered by employers in the workforce in North America: retirement savings, life insurance, disability insurance, and health insurance. So I would argue that the church should offer all four benefits to protect the church in case the unexpected occurs. You say, well, Marshall, have you ever seen that happen? Yes, I have. And it's been tragic when a pastor, whether the senior or lead pastor, an associate or an assistant pastor, a youth pastor, a children's pastor, is head of their home, even not head of their home, and they're helping in some way, and they die out of season, and they don't have insurance and you don't have insurance, and you haven't made certain that they're covered for that. It can leave a spouse with 3 or 4 children and a mortgage payment and all the expenses and nothing to carry them on. They've lost their income producer. So I want to encourage you that you can protect your ordained staff so that they can fulfill their ministry for your church, knowing that they and their family will be cared for if they're taken out of season. So by helping your staff build assets for the future, a retirement savings plan, can give them confidence that helps them better fulfill their ministry. Having insurance of disability, life insurance, and health insurance can protect them as well. It also ensures, when it comes to retirement, that they will not have to work beyond the point where you or them want them to. And so the first benefit that we're going to deal with is retirement. You put it there so that they can retire in a timely way or not have to work at, pardon I say this, at Walmart as a greeter at 75 years of age because they didn't plan well for retirement. You say, is this happening? And my response to you is, yes, this is happening. I've seen pastors in their 60s closing in on their retirement age and their ability to work as effectively as they have and have no retirement, and they'd opted out of Social Security. So that being the case, Finance Committee, Pastoral Relations Committee, Budget Committee, lay leader, elder in the church, you stop and look at this, stop and look at your pastoral staff, and lead the way with this. So as we talk about this, well, let me just give you some data that's been collected, and I've heard different numbers. But if the retirement age for someone in my age group, and I'm in my mid-50s, is 67 years of age, the life expectancy for someone 65 years of age is 85. For me, they said it was into the 90s. So if I retire at my allowed time of 67 years of age, then 67 to 91 is a lot of years to need income to provide and care for me as I age, if I live and die by natural causes, where I'm just going to get old and my body's going to fail. That I've got to plan on 18 to 30 years of retirement years in income to care. So you not only have your pastor, but the spouse to care for as well. And so the retirement part that we're talking about is that you want to make certain you plan well. So let's just say that your pastor's earning is $50,000 a year at retirement. So during retirement for 18 to 30 years, if he needs 70 to 80% of that to live for the next 20 to 30 years, then he's going to have to set aside, $500,000 to $1 million in order to, depending on what the economy and inflation does and all the other things, variables that we can't control, he's going to need to set aside money. So if he needs money, a portion of what he is making, and he's got to save maybe 20 times that amount, you're looking at a lot of money that he's going to have to set aside to be able to care for himself over the years. And so you've got 401k plans, 403b plans, traditional IRAs, and any other vehicle that you can use to contribute to remove his income from being taxable. And so they don't pay taxes on the retirement funds until they withdraw it years down the road, and it gives it a chance to earn interest. So now it's earning interest as those years go on, and you have to do your calculations. So is your pastor in or out of retirement? Out of Social Security. Does he have a preference about it? Is he going to, for instance, is he going to match the investments? Are you going to match the investments? Are you going to provide it as a church? Or is he going to initiate it and you're going to contribute to it? Or are you going to have two different funds? And so you've got church provided, employee provided, church initiated, employee initiated. You've got set programs that are offered through the tax codes and through provisions that are there. What are you going to do with retirement? You need to do something, and you need to project out and do the math. And we'll give you some worksheets to download to go with this video. Then there's life insurance. The death of a loved one is traumatic enough without the added anguish of not knowing how the surviving family member will meet their expenses. A life insurance plan offers a vital protection against, let's face it, economic catastrophe. It also makes it easier for your church to support the family without undermining your church's ministry. In other words, your pastor passes away out of season. You didn't know what was going to happen. It happened. Pastor's wife is there with children in the house, and now you feel like, how are we going to take care of her and take care and hire and call a new pastor to come pastor our church? So as you go through this, you got to think through those kind of scenarios. So some of the tax laws that I've been told is that your church can provide up to $50,000 worth of life insurance coverage without tax consequences to your pastor. The value of the church-paid life insurance over $50,000 does have to be reported as taxable income. So why not do what you can do as whole or term life or some hybrid thereof to provide life insurance for your pastor? Most employer-provided insurance is offered as a group term life. So if you have multiple staff on your church and you want to offer and get a cheaper price, consider shopping life insurance vehicles and offerings so you can find and steward your money to provide the most. So in the regular work world that doesn't have some of the benefits that pastors do, like housing, term life. So when insurance is purchased through a group plan, the premium is often, maybe almost always, lower than what an individual would pay for a private policy. Now, having said that, you're going to have to go shop and see what you've got. Here's another one that we mentioned, and that is disability insurance. A disability insurance policy provides a replacement income. It allows your church to continue its ministry by freeing resources that might otherwise be required to support the disabled minister. Now, the good news is, from the research I have done, is that the long-term disability that you may think of doesn't happen nearly as often as short-term, meaning 3 months. And so employer-paid premiums for disability insurance are not taxable for employees. They only pay taxes on income paid by the policy after they are disabled. As with employer-sponsored life insurance, group disability coverage is usually less expensive than an individual policy. Now, you've got to look at your staff, and you've got work-related incidences that may make them disabled. You have to look to see if you've got workers' comp in your state, and if churches are a part of that. You've got accidents that happen that are outside of work-related, and you've got illnesses. So you may say, well, we're going to set aside contingency money for our staff to pay their salary during the first 3 months of disability. And if we need that money, it is there for that in case it always happens. Then we're going to pick up with our policy at 3 months, and we're going to provide 2 years' worth of disability insurance, or forever. And so you come up with a package that will help them, but to cover it so that it doesn't put undue pressure, strain on the pastor's family and on the churches. And just knowing that they're cared for and you provided for them frees them up in their mind and heart to move on. So whether you do it for them or they do it, look at the idea of disability insurance and if it might be included in the compensation package. Here is the next area, and that's health insurance. Well, at this point, as I make this training video, my response is good luck figuring this one out at the moment. You've got to do your due diligence, and then you've got to stay on top of it as we kind of navigate our way through Obamacare. So, but let me talk to you because I can't really give you much advice about health insurance except do your due diligence and stay current with it. Let me talk to you about 2 savings accounts and spending accounts, 2 vehicles that can be a great tax package for your staff to reduce their taxable income. One is a health savings account plan, and the other is a flexible spending account. These accounts can save employees tax savings by setting aside designated money on a regular pay period for health and for dependent care expenses. And so annually, employees decide how much to set aside from their paychecks for the coming year, subject to the IRS limits to their code. The withheld funds are not reported as taxable income for federal income tax or for Social Security Medicare tax. In many states, the flexible spending account contributions are not reported for state income tax purposes either. When an employee incurs an eligible expense, say for health, they submit documentation to the employer and they are reimbursed with tax-free funds. So your church can set up an FSA or an HSA, health care, dependent care, or for both of them to help them. So the health care FSA can be used to pay for eligible medical, dental, vision, and hearing expenses, and a dependent care FSA can be used to pay for care for a dependent child or a dependent adult who is incapable of self-care. So you've got two different accounts there that you can investigate. So under IRS rules, unspent FSA funds cannot be carried over from year to year. Any funds not used to reimburse claims by the end of the following year's 2.5 months grace period are forfeited and returned to the employer. That said, employees with even a modest level of predictable health care or dependent care spending can save a significant amount of or percentage or amount of money by paying for it with pre-tax dollars. So while you might not be able to fully figure out the health care and the Affordable Health Care Act at this moment, you can look at and see how you might save them money from removing income out of being taxable through these two accounts. Now let's move to the third component of the compensation package for church staff, and that is business expense. So I have some ideas for you, and that is to recommend that you set up an accountable plan. And generally speaking, a pastor, a church staff, is going to be accountable to either the church through an accountable plan that the church establishes, or to the IRS and the state government through giving proper account through their tax return for documented receipts. So they're going to be accountable either to the government or to the church. So because your church staff are often expected to use their vehicle to make home visits and hospital visits and to do funerals and weddings and to represent your church at conferences and local events, to entertain guests, to develop professionally through continuing education, all these different things that a pastor is doing for you, it is important that you budget for and reimburse these items separately from their compensation. Otherwise, your staff will have to pay taxes on the reimbursed accounts. The key is to reimburse business expense through an accountable plan. Under this arrangement, ministry-related expenses are not reported as taxable income on the employee's W-2 or Form 1040. At the same time, the employee cannot claim these expenses as tax deductions. And so here are some of the requirements. The requirement for an accountable plan is it must be business expenses incurred while performing their duties. Number 2, it must provide documentation of the expense, written evidence of the expenditure, mileage, meals, tools, whatever it looks like, and it has to be proper documentation, and it needs to be or must be submitted within 60 days of the expenditure. So the IRS, if you're going to have an accountable plan, and listen carefully, has set requirements on that accountable plan. Now, along with the requirements, there are some restrictions. You cannot fund through salary reduction. And so if I'm understanding this correctly, the reimbursement must be over and above the salary that is paid to your pastors and come from a budgeted line item. Excess reimbursements must be returned or they become taxable income. So be mindful of the restrictions there, that you have to give proper evidence on the receipt and it has to come from a line item. Now, we suggest that you do a resolution, an official, documented, in a part of your minutes, a part of your policies, adopted by the proper authorities in your church, and your church really needs to meet this requirement. Your church must pass a resolution establishing an accountable plan. It must be in writing, and it must specify which expenses the church will reimburse. Thanks again to mmbb.org, this group of this company, this firm that provides retirement planning, wrote a document. It's in your resources or sources for this video. And here's what they recommend you say, and you can use this one. Resolve that in addition to the compensation paid to our pastor staff, we will reimburse them for automobile and other ministry-related expenses considered ordinary and necessary to carry out their responsibilities. Expenses must be substantiated as to the date, amount, and purpose within 60 days after they are incurred, after they happen, or they will not be reimbursed. Any expenses, any excess reimbursements must be refunded to the church within 120 days after expenses are paid or incurred. So you set up this expense account and you keep it current so that when a pastor is entertaining someone at his home or taking them out to eat, or he is buying books and you've given him an allowance for that in your a line item in the budget, that they can buy their books, their tools, their periodicals, magazine subscriptions, continuing education subscription to our online training, that you have allotted them money that they have at their discretion that's a part of their ordinary and necessary duties for your church. An accountable plan is good stewardship. So study the requirements, the restrictions, develop your resolution, and get it going. So here are some examples of reimbursable business expenses. These are qualified reimbursable business expenses. His mileage on his car, whether they're going by car, train, or plane, or covered wagon, that expense they have incurred, they can be reimbursed for. Entertainment, conferences, their education, continuing education, either formal education through a seminary, undergrad, or non-formal, such as our gap knowledge that we provide through our online subscription, our online training, where they can get continuing education from industry professionals in a multitude of areas to help them grow and develop, because great leaders are leaders that are continually growing. That means they have to invest in themselves. And so we provide these tools for that reason. Here are some tools that they might have. Subscriptions, books, periodicals. They also have fees and dues that may be due. So as you look at these, their travel, their entertainment, attending conferences, their continuing education, tools that they may use, fees and dues to things that they may have, and here's equipment. Now, for those of you that have an office in your home, and you've gone and purchased, purchase equipment, a copier that serves as a printer and a scanner and a fax machine, your cell phones that you're using, the computers that are sitting on your desk, laptops, desktops, iPads, cell phones, whatever is coming next in technology world, that equipment. You've got to decide who owns it, but if the church is going to own it and you reimburse them for that expenditure, as I understand the rules, you can do that. And then you've got other things that come about with just supplies, and I didn't put it on the screen, but a stapler and staples and paper for the printer and any number of other tools that you may have in your office if you're running a home office. Not just a church planner may have his office in his home. I, for years, had an office at the church property, and I had an office in my home. And I functioned out of both and had equipment and tools at both. So as you go through this, you do your due diligence, and I've given you the resources that are updated annually to help you determine what really is qualified reimbursable business expense. So let's look at some other considerations for you as we go through this. And let me talk about this for your church staff. And that is, every employee is either exempt or not exempt. And you say, what in the world are you talking about? Well, let's take two different positions in your church. You've got your pastor, your pastoral staff, who are exempt from the 40-hour work week. They may work 60. You're paying them a compensation, a pay package, a salary and housing, but you're not paying them overtime. You don't have to pay them for that 41st hour they spent during the work week. But your administrative staff, your secretary, business manager, who maybe are set and they are non-exempt. If they work 41 hours and that you haven't declared them exempt, they're to be paid for that 41st hour. And there are rules for who is exempt and non-exempt. And so if this applies to your church in your state, you've got to do your due diligence to figure that out and to comply with it. Let's talk about something else that often is not considered, and that is paid days off. So here's a list of things for you to consider as we look at this. You have sick days where your pastor may get the flu or the mumps or some other virus, and he is out sick or has an illness that knocks him out. How many days are you going to give to him? And are you going to allow them to roll it over from year to year? You say, is it possible for someone to go 5 years without using a sick day? And the answer to that is yes. I have family members who've gone 5 years without taking a sick day from work. Holidays. What are going to be paid holidays? Well, if you designate that and maybe you have 11 or 12 or whatever the max limit is, and you allow them to take 8 of them or 10 of them, or you say, well, here are the ones where we're paying, take the other days off as a part of your vacation, so forth. So I'm giving you options here for packaging the paid days off and putting them into writing. Vacation days. It's been stated that for a pastor coming in to start with 3 weeks of paid vacation before you have a heart attack at that, because in the work world, depending on where you are at C-level or mid-management or blue collar or somewhere in between all of those, you say, well, I have to work 3 years to get 2 weeks of paid vacation. I only have 1 week, but your pastor is there every weekend, and he also is a C-level in my mind, and so to give him a certain amount of vacation time is giving him 3 Sundays off as paid vacation out of 52. So as you go through this, look at it. You don't have to stair step and say, well, if you stay with us, for 15 years, we'll give you a month off. You can do it that way, but it's not uncommon. So with all the pressure that is on our pastors today in our country, giving them days off as a part of their work week, giving them sick days and holidays and vacation time, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Along with vacations, have you ever considered providing sabbaticals for your pastoral staff? Now, it may be a 3-week sabbatical or a 6-week sabbatical or a 6-month sabbatical, and this is time for your pastors to rest and recover and relax and to work on themselves and their marriage and their children, and perhaps they go and continue education for a short block of time, but you give them a sabbatical. Sometimes a pastor goes and he studies a particular area that is vastly or greatly needed in the church or in the community, and he comes back with solutions. And he couldn't add that workload to his regular workload by spending the extra time, so you give him a sabbatical. And he goes away for 3 months, 6 months, and comes back in, and it's woven into the ministry of your church. And you may require him to work 3 more years for your church, or he has to pay back part or whole of that sabbatical, the expense that is there. So you can do that by giving them an extended time off to study a particular subject. And like I said, it can be a week or months, depending on the church and the situation. Then there's civil service. Have you ever considered that he may get called to jury duty, or he may be have military training because he's part of the reserves, or you may have work-related that he has. Oh, by the way, I didn't include this in this, but he may have a death in his family, so there's bereavement. Well, where are you going to fit that in? Does he have to use vacation days to do that? And so you look at the civil service and then personal days that he may have for a death in his family, that you want him to be able to go and spend 3 or 4 days or whatever length of time you think is needed, and you allot that, and that's paid days off. Then there are work-related, where he has continuing education, seminars, conferences, speaking engagements, where he has taken a day off and he is gone, and it really is work-related, so it's a paid day. Well, that spills into another consideration that I want to step into when something is work-related. And so when your pastor is invited to come speak for a conference at a group of churches, or maybe at one church to do a short-term revival or special meetings, and he is a keynote speaker, or he is the guest speaker for that time, and he is paid an honorarium plus his expenses for doing so, under your state laws, maybe under the federal law, work for hire comes into play here, and it may apply to your situation as a church. So you're paying him a salary. He goes to speak for 3 days, 4 days, Sunday through Wednesday at this church or at this conference. He is paid an honorarium. Who does the honorarium belong to? The pastor or the church? Because you're paying him. So as you have to work this out, pastors, be aware that you really need to have some clear understanding who owns the following things. And so who owns the books that you author? While you're pastoring that church, you author a book or a syllabus or a training tool for the church. Who does it belong to? The sermons you preach and you publish them, who do they belong to? The videos that you may record when you're preaching, or you're doing like I'm doing right now, where you record a video training hour for your people, and you want to put that out to the public and sell it to them, make it available to others. Who does it belong to? Who gets the revenue from your blog post? Maybe you've created a blog post and you allow companies to advertise on it, and it's generating X number of dollars per month. Or you wrote a magazine article and you got reimbursed for that. So as you go to speak at that conference or seminar at that church as a guest speaker, and they've given you travel expenses to cover that, but then an honorarium, who gets the honorarium? Well, I would get it in writing, who owns these things, and work it out so it doesn't become a bone of contention over time. So how are you going to regulate this? Are you going to regulate it by position or by the person or by the profession, whether they're exempt or non-exempt status? But you've got to look at that and consider that this is something, who owns the work that is done. So let's say your pastor is at home and it's 10 o'clock at night and he is working on this doctorate and he writes his dissertation. That dissertation gets repackaged and published. Who does it belong to? Church paid for his education. They paid him a salary while he was doing it. He produces this work that was done while he was an exempt employee, where he is paid a salary, whether he works 40 hours or 60 hours or 80 hours or 110 hours that week. He is paid a salary in housing. He's got a pay package. So you want to work this out so that it is in writing and in part of your employee handbook. So if you need help with that, get a hold of us and we can engage with you and help you with that. Here's another consideration that often is not thought about. My wife works in an industry where they regularly deal with the terms onboarding and offboarding. Well, onboarding is when you bring an employee in. Offboarding is when the employee leaves. During the middle of the time, one of my pastor friends jokingly said, are we going to waterboard the employees? So you've got onboarding, waterboarding, and offboarding. Severance is something that needs to be clearly stated, and it would be very good for churches to be proactive and look at this before they onboard or call that pastor or staff to come in, that the employee package is written out and severance is clearly stated and funded, so that when that pastor who comes in today and he leaves 20 years from now for whatever reason, that there is a severance package that he knows is going to be his. Now, you have some determinations to make about this when you offboard an employee. What are the terms by which you will give them a severance? And, well, let me talk to you about this first. Some guys say to me, and have said to me as I've gone through this training one-on-one with churches, why does pastor get a severance? I'm an employee. I don't get a severance. I'm just done working. I'm getting my last paycheck 2 weeks after I'm done, and that was the delay in it, and that's that. Well, you'll have to decide why you want to set up a severance package, but it is the humane thing to do. It is the kind thing to do, and your pastors are often viewed as C-level, as leadership and upper management for your church, and the common practice for that, because they have specific customized skill sets that they have gone to special education to get their seminary training. They have continued with their education, and it applies to pastoring churches. And sometimes it isn't transferable over to another industry or career. That being the case, you help them as they step out of yours and into the next one to give them a severance package. Well, it's much better if they know. Now, there can be some terms where you say, Pastor, if you have a moral issue, you as the employee have a moral issue, or a performance issue, or a retirement issue, or leaving on your own to go to another ministry, or you're just burnt out and leaving the ministry. Under some of these issues, moral issues, we may reduce your severance or not give it at all. If we fire you because of performance issues, your severance package will be this. If you're retiring, we have set up a retirement fund. Do you give him a severance on top of that, so he gets a full salary for a period of time? Then if he's leaving on his own, he's going to take another pastorate, or take a position in a seminary or university or college or a nonprofit. One of my friends just took a position at a mission board. And so in doing that, do you have a severance package to help them that they'll use for moving expenses or gap one way or another, or to be able to carry their benefits over, and what's going to be included in it? So you've got the length of time of the severance package, the terms by which you'll pay severance, and what are you going to include in it? Salary, housing, benefits. What are you going to include in this? So as you look at this, what's going to be included, how long are you going to do it, what amount is going to be given to them, amount of days or weeks or months, and you've got to consider these things before it comes up on you. Now, I saw a church the other day that had a policy where they decided person to person. And I think that determining whether or not to give a person any severance based on the individual may get you in trouble. And so it might be better to have things laid out as I've stated them to you. Exactly how are you going to do this? What are the terms? What is the amount? What's to be included? And how long, the length? And write it out for the position and have that agreed upon at the time of employment, or you'll have to go do that agreement in the midstream now with the staff that's been there with you. So as you look at these things, let me give you some compensation resources and then some sources I've used to make this happen. This is one resource that you can go get. You can go to this website, hit this link, go to this one, and of course it's going to be updated for 013, 014. And the cost when I looked at it was $34.95. Minister's Tax Guide. This is done by Richard Hammer, and it's a free resource. You go to that link, and I found it, a document written out, and it's free of charge, what Richard has done. And he's a foremost voice in tax law, and so I would tell you to go find Richard Hammer. Now, Worth's Income Tax Guide for Ministers. Here's the website. Here's the amount of money that you can do. Zondervan puts out one, and these are annually that they're putting these out and updating it so that you can spend money. And so pastor, assistant pastor, associate pastor, executive pastor, lead pastor, whatever your position, children's pastor, and you are ordained, working for your church, making your income through the church, here are tax guides to help you prepare your taxes. So church family leadership, look at this, help them. Then when it comes to setting up a formula for paying your staff, here is one book that was written, and the first resource I gave you deals with a compensation survey of thousands of pastors and thousands of churches, and shows you how the packages are put together and how much is paid for a bunch of different categories, so you can create your own compensation matrix. But this particular guide deals with a matrix that you can follow. Okay, and so Jim and Carl, I know them personally, they put together this package some years ago, and it's for a Christian school, but it can apply to your church. Now, I also have some presentation resources. The website His Sheep is what I referred to about the Survey of Pastors by the Leadership Magazine, and then mmbbb.org. I wanted you to have access to their website. They wrote a nice compensation guide PDF document that you can download and read through to help you. Well, I hope this has been helpful. That's certainly why we've done this. I'm Marshall Shannon, your ministry design coach. Here are our two websites and my email address. If you want to direct me, come to me directly. You can call me on either one of these two lines, and we'll be happy to talk with you and help you. You can always engage with us to do one-on-one coaching off-site or on-site to help you go through this. And some churches, you're going to need that help, and so we're offering it to you. Thank you very much.